Hi. First of all, I want to start with a commercial. This is brought to you by my books, which are in the back later on. We're going to be leaving after dinner, so if you want to get some of my books, I've got my 2 prayer books and my proto-indo-european book with me. Okay, so let's start the actual presentation. For the folks playing at home, I'm Ceisiwr Serith, and I'm going to be talking about Indo-European drinks/drinks, because there are different ones in different cultures. And I believe that they did have an original. They were originally one, but we have to deal with the descendant ones first. They appear both in myth and ritual. The myth one, among the myth one, is the idea of fire and water, or the fiery water, and the ritual one is just an actual drink. Sometimes the ritual drink shows up in a myth, and sometimes it shows up in an actual ritual even currently being conducted. The amount of overlap between fire and water and sacred drink I'm still tussling with. Some days I think there's really no connection. Some days I think they're exactly the same thing. Other days I think there's sort of a give and take. I don't know what I think today. I haven't really thought about it today. The myths that surround it overlap with some other myths, particularly those including horses' heads and eyes. I'm not going to deal specifically with those overlaps because that, again, would start me off on rabbit trails and just way too much. But you'll see these things showing up throughout the myths that I talk about, as well as through the rituals. There are also sacred foods, and some of those are connected with or have the same characteristics as the sacred drink, and some of those I will be talking about. It's important to understand those things as well. So it's generally my custom when dealing with proto-indo-european subjects to start in Ireland and work my way east. I'm going to make one jump towards the end, but that's roughly what I'm going to do today. So it's going from west to east. So in Ireland, the classic example of the fire and water thing is the well of nectar. That's the origin of the Bowen River. And in this story, Necton has a well and 3 cupbearers, and only Necton and his 3 cupbearers are allowed to drink from the well. Well, Necton's wife, Bowen, doesn't really like this idea, so she goes to the well to drink from the well, and the well overflows and chases her away, in the process destroying her a foot, a hand, and an eye. Now, how she got rid of a foot without affecting the rest of the leg, I don't know, but that's what the story says. It's probably more likely, actually, no, it's a thigh, not a foot. The thigh is probably being used as a euphemism for genitalia there. In the different myths, there's several different versions of the story, and they give different reasons for why she goes there. One version it's out of pride, that she's going to show she's just as good as everybody else. One reason it's because she's just committed adultery with the Dafta and wants to purify herself so she doesn't get caught. And in the third version of it, she goes there and she goes counterclockwise around the well, which of course is the wrong direction to go. So in that case, it's ritual and propriety that does it. However, whatever reason was, it's a case of her being inappropriate, and she's not the one who's supposed to be doing this thing. There's some sort of ritual problem, either an impurity question or a improper ritual act. The well itself has its origin in the well of Shegesh, which gets its power from, or Shegesh is just the name of the actual well itself, depending on which version you read, and it gets its power from hazelnuts that drop into it, and every 7 years it sends out this flood. Roughly the same myth is also told of the Shannon River. In that case, though, the well is actually under the sea. We've probably all heard the stories of Finn, and we've probably all heard the story of Finn getting his wisdom from the Salmon of Wisdom, where he's catching this fish for the druid, gets set to cook it, and then he decides to taste it, burns his thumb, and sticks his thumb in his mouth, and now he picks up the wisdom from the Salmon of Wisdom. That's not the only version of how he got his wisdom, though. There are quite a few, actually. In one case, he's at the door of the Shia Confederate, and the daughters of Bek Makbuin try to close the door on him. One of them has a vessel filled with water from Bek's well, which Finn spills into Finn's mouth. In another variant, there are actually 3 daughters. Or another version, another story, Finn drinks from each of 2 wells near Confederate, or he bathes in the water of Sliabh Cuilan and loses his strength, so he and his other men lay siege to the Sidhe until Cuilan comes out and offers him a drink from a golden cup. And in another version, he encounters a woman with a vessel of water or an empty vessel. In case, if it's the empty vessel version, she's just distributed the waters for drink. She closes the door, Finn catches his thumb in it, puts his thumb in his mouth, and gets the wisdom that illuminates. So besides the salmon version, there are quite a few variations, including drink, several of which involve women providing the drink. The next myth I want to talk about, a very famous story, Bella and Skell, or the Phantom's Frenzy. Let me actually write this down for you guys with spelling, because you can find this online. So you might be interested in looking it up. Mary Jones has it on her site. And I think it's other places as well. It's definitely worth reading if you want interested in Irish myth, and especially in the sacred drink in Ireland and the god Lugh. If there's something like that. In this myth, it is about, I can never remember which king it's about. Cormac, I believe it is, either Cormac or Con. I think it's Con. A man comes to him through a fog and basically says, "Come on to my place." And so he goes to his place. And as part of the feast, a young woman who is identified as the sovereignty of Ireland comes out with a cup. And the guy who identifies himself as being Lugh and tells the woman with the cup the names of the next 52 kings, I think it is, of Ireland, and she pours out some drink for each of those 52 kings. Medivh, we probably all know about Medivh from the Toyn book Linga, the cattle raider Cooley. That's Medivh of Connacht. She's interesting that her father is Yochi Fedlech, which means the enduring horse. Medivh means mead, or drunkenness. It comes from the proto-indo-european word medu, which means mead. Her father is also the High King of Tara, so she's connected closely with both horses and with kingship. There's another Medivh, though. Actually, there are two others, I believe. There's another Medivh, Medivh Lethair, and she was married to 9 kings in a row, and it was said that you couldn't be king of Ireland without being married to her. Now we get to my favorite topic. Anybody knows my favorite topic? I bet you know my favorite topic. The horse sacrifice. Yes! Horse sacrifice in Gerald of Wales.
Oh, glad I came on time.
He says that up among the Tir Connell, to become king, the new king has sex with a horse, and then they kill the horse, cook it and boil it in water, and he sits in the cauldron and drinks from it without using his hands. And then all of his servants drink from it as well. So there's a lovely combination there of sacrifice, horses, sex, and drink. And also a bath, I guess you'd say. And also the idea of being surrounded by his courtiers who then have to drink after him. Lovely story. It's got a lot of parallels in other Indo-European cultures. It's one of my fascinations. One final thing from Ireland, Mesca Ullagh, where Connor arranges his drinking house by deeds and social rank. So if his drinking house, they're all arranged in the proper order according to social rank. So let's skip over to Gaul. Athenaeus, writing around the turn of the 2nd to 3rd century CE, however, reporting from something that Posidonius wrote in the 1st century BC, writes, "When a large number dine together, they sit around in a circle with the most influential man in the center, like the leader of the chorus, whether he surpasses the other in warlike skill or in ability of family or wealth. Beside him sits the host, and next on either side the others in order of distinction. The drink of the wealthy classes is wine imported from Italy or from the territory of Marseille. This is unadulterated, but sometimes a little water is added. The lower classes drink wheaten beer prepared with honey, but most people drink it plain. It is called korma. They use a common cup, drinking a little at a time, not more than a mouthful, but they do it rather frequently." So what we're looking at here particularly is that when they gather for their feasts, everybody sits in order of precedence. And they don't down the thing, they're drinking it in small sips, so it's almost like they're not doing it because they're thirsty or want to get drunk, but they're doing it for formal reasons. It's also interesting that different classes used different kinds of drink. it's in the upper classes using wine. Obviously, the Celts would not originally have used wine; they imported that from the Mediterranean. So they earlier would have used a different drink, probably a beer or a mead, and then that gets able to be drunk by the lower classes thereafter. So the idea of different classes drinking different kinds of drink is also relevant here. Now, I'm just sort of barreling through a lot of these things. After I see them, you'll start to see patterns, especially when I start switching to other families. So just let the things flow through your head and think about it. The final thing I want to talk about among the Celts is the great princely grave Hochdorf, where a chieftain was found on a lovely bronze Etruscan couch dressed in silk, which tells you that it's interesting that there was trade with the Orient at the time. And I really can't, off the top of my head, I don't know the date, but it's very significantly BC. And also in there was a cauldron that held 500 liters, and so it was a big sucker. And it had been filled with mead, which also had herbs in it, identified as more than 100 different plants in this mead. It also would not have been done fermenting when it was buried. So either the guy died, so, oh my God, we need mead, let's make some, or there was a point to it that it wasn't supposed to be all done. It was supposed to ferment in the other world, perhaps. There were also drinking horns. There was one large one and a number of smaller ones. The belief being that the large one belonged to the chieftain, the other ones were for his retainers who would be gathered around him. All right, now we'll go to the Germanic world. The Germanic world, you got to start with the cosmology, because that has a lot of important both drinks and fire, water sort of things. We're all mostly probably familiar with the German cosmology with the Yggdrasil, and at its base is the three wells of Earth, Vegelmir and Mimir. Bauschatz and Turtelpetra both argue that these were actually originally just one well, and that Snorri has elaborated and separated them, and I think he's probably right on that. They're probably right on this one. Where the two joined together, the well of Earth and Yggdrasil, was where the gods sat in their council seats. Bauschatz describes this as that's where the past feeds the present, and the present becomes the past. The dew that falls from the tree is honeydew and feeds bees. And interestingly enough, you actually can make mead from ash sap. So this is an actual accurate thing. Earth's tree, of course, is the one where the Norns sit, the goddesses of fate. Mimir's well has a route that goes to Mimir's well from Yggdrasil through Ginnungagap to which is the chaos area. And after his ordeal on the tree, where he hung for 9 days, Odin goes to Mimir and is allowed to drink from the well of Mimir, but only by giving up an eye, which then becomes hidden in the well. So in this case, the drink is the source of wisdom. It's interesting that people a lot of times talk about how the sacrifice of Odin gives him his wisdom, but actually it's the one that prepares him to take the drink from Mimir's well. It's Mimir's well that gives him the wisdom, not the sacrifice. And the reason for that we'll talk about in just a little bit. The third well, Vegelmir, which means roaring kettle or seething cauldron. So this is some sort of burning thing. The serpent Nidhogg, which gnaws at the roots of Yggdrasil, lives in it. And the Eichthenir, who feeds on Yggdrasil, the drops from his antler that are falling, they hit his antler from falling from the tree, and then they go down into Vegelmir as well. So that particular well is getting input from the tree. And on the tree, there is the goat Hezra that feeds on the leaves of the tree, and her milk is the milk of the dead, the Einherjar in Valhalla, the ones who in the end will help fight the bad guys with the gods, and of course won't lose, but that's okay. And that's their drink. It's what keeps them alive even though they're dead. Finally, it's interesting. Odin is said to only drink wine, and whether he would have drunk wine or some other drink is open to question. Drink types can vary from story to story, and even within a story. In Lokasena, it refers to drinking ale, and like a few lines later, it's beer. It's mead. And so they're a little bit fuzzy on terminology as far as which alcoholic drinks are being used. The most important myth, however, about the sacred drink is in Scout's Caparno, in which the Ceisiwr and Vanir conduct a treaty by spitting into a vat, and then the Kvasir is beheaded, and his blood is mixed with the spit, and it becomes the mead. Eventually, it ends up in the hands of the giant Sutton, whose daughter is Gunnlaug, and Sutton takes it back to his mountain fortress and hides it inside the mountain with Gunnlaug looking over it. Well, Odin decides he wants it, so he goes there, and after some various adventures, he ends up making his way through a hole into the mountain in the form of a snake. He sleeps with Gunnlaug for 3 nights, and as a reward, she says that he can have 3 drinks from the mead, with 3 cauldrons, and with each drink he drains a cauldron. So he drinks all the mead. He turns himself into an eagle and starts to fly back to Asgard. Sutton finds out about this and turns himself into an eagle and starts out after him. Sutton is almost catching up with Odin, and to distract him, Odin, if you read a lot of translations, it will say sends out some of the mead backwards. What it really means is he crapped it out. There are other references to it that makes it clear that that's actually what's going on. And this falls to the earth and becomes the drink is drunk by bad poets. Yes, you'll actually see it that it was drunk by poets. Yeah, it's drunk by the bad poets, and they drink mead shit. And so then Odin gets to Asgard, and he spits the remaining mead into vats, and this becomes the drink of the gods and of good poets. Very strong parallels between this and some other myths that will come up later. In the Lay of Hundla, Ottar can only succeed to his father's throne by demonstrating his possession of numinous knowledge, including genealogies. And so Freya, who's his lover, gives him the beer of memory, which she's gotten from a wise woman who guards it. So in this myth, we've got a female acquiring from another female a drink which gives knowledge, including genealogy, showing Ottar's place in the world historically, and also giving him kingship, giving him a place in society. Valkyries. On some gravestones from the Viking era, we have images of women carrying drinking horns, and in the myths it tells us that they are ones who greet the dead when they reach Valhalla, and they greet them with a drink from the cup. In Baldur's Dream, Odin goes to hell, and the mead is being prepared to greet Baldur when he gets there. This ties in with, as I mentioned later, I talk about it with the with the death of the sacrifice of Odin. He's killing himself, which therefore makes him one of the dead, which therefore means he gets to drink from the mead, from the cup, just like one of the dead would. So that's why that might be one of the reasons why he sacrifices himself, to qualify himself to get the drink. The myth of Idun involves a food, apples, that the gods need to keep their immortality. And one day the giant Thiazi steals them, so Loki has to turn himself into an eagle and go get them back. Actually, he steals her as well. In the earliest version of the poem, however, it doesn't mention the apples. It just says that they took the secrets of the immortality that she had. So whether they were originally apples or not is open to question. There weren't any apples in Northern Europe until a fairly late date, so it's possible that originally it was something else, and that perhaps under classical influence it got changed to apples. Drinks create marriage. No marriage was legal unless there was drinking involved. There are many references to bridal ale, but there are no references to the ale of grooms. So the ale at these was identified with the female. Now you can give some good Freudian reasons for identification there, but that's just worth thinking about, that the marriage drink comes from the women. Symbols, drinking, singing, and gift giving. People sit in order inside and drink is distributed. There's a great line from the haoma: "Hail to the giver, a guest has come. Where shall a stranger sit?" It's important. Where you sit is important. It shows what your role is in society. Usually the drink was distributed by a woman. Drinking is orderly. There are no records of any brawling or destruction or anything actually happening during the symbol. It's called drinking the feast, and like I said, no food involved, just drinking the feast. At a symbol, they talk about their genealogies, they talk about great deeds. So just like at the foot of Yggdrasil, the past is being spoken into the present. Oddly enough, there are no gods mentioned in any of the records of symbols. There is one, though, that does talk about the gods, another kind of feast, in Snorri, Life of Hakon the Good, where everybody at Trondheim has to go to this big feast. A sacrificial cup is placed over the fire. There is a sacrifice as well. The chieftain consecrates it. A toast is drunk to Odin, and then toast to Njord and Freyr, and then the bragaful, which drinking that makes him the king and get to ascend to the high throne, and then toast in memory of the dead. So we've got a great ritual there. We've got a sacrifice. We've got a ritual drink. We've got toast to the gods. We've got a waters of life kind of a thing, and then we've got offerings to the dead. Beowulf is great. It's got one of the best examples of this story, so I'm actually going to read this from a translation of the actual scene. "And then the gracious woman offered the cup first to the East Danes' king, the guardian of their land, bade him be happy in partaking of this beer assembly, be amiable to the people. He took part eagerly in the feast," and the word for feast uses symbol, "and formable cup, fully victorious king. Then her steps led here and there the lady of the helmings. To veterans and youths, to each group of them she offered the treasure vessel, until the moment came when to Beowulf, the ring-adored queen, gratified in her heart, brought the cup of mead. She greeted the chief of the Geats, gave thanks to God, wise as she was in her words, that her wish had come to good, that she might have confidence in some hero, a comforter in her woes. He partook of the cup, the fierce slayer, from Wealhtheow's hands, and then chanted his eagerness to fight." Lovely scene. Everybody's seated in the hall, everybody's seated in their proper place, and the queen comes in and gives first to the king and then to everybody else in their order of precedence. And finally to the stranger, and you think they give this, you might want to give to the stranger earlier as a hospitality thing. Well, they don't know who he is, they don't know what his story is, they don't know where to put him, what his precedence would be. So he gets it last, and then he tells her who he is and what he's going to be doing. And it says that she's very happy by what he was going to be saying. Interestingly enough, this has been argued so many times, it's just taken as a given that the hall, Heorot, that this takes place in is as a cosmos. It's seen as the ordered world, and then outside is the big bad world where Grendel the monster lives. So we've got the idea of being the very ordered world within which there's a very ordered society and within which this very ordered ritual takes place. A great story by Ibn Fadlan, which you may or may not be cognizant of, is about a funeral among the Rus. The Rus, actually, where we get the word Russia from, were actually Vikings. So they were Germanic. And it was a funeral he talked about. There was a horse race, and then a slave girl who had sex with all of the chieftains, all of the underlings of the chieftain who was dead. And she was then given a drink, special drink, and lifted up, and so she could see inside the boat, the ship that the chieftain was in, and told her the visions of the other world and how she saw the chieftain in the other world. And then they strangled her, and she was buried with the boat with the king. So the angel of death, who does all this stuff, I'm guessing it was the Arabic translation of Valkyrie. That angel was his translation of it. So she's the one who does the actual strangling, and she's the one who provides the cup. I'm going to skip over the Roman. There's very little in the Roman. I'm just going to skip that one by today. In Greece, let's jump over to Greece now. Ambrosia and nectar. We're all familiar with those terms. Food and drink. Sometimes One's food and the other's drink. Sometimes one's drink and the other's food. But usually nectar is the drink and the ambrosia is the food. It gives the gods their youth, their heyday. Without it, they would grow old. The ambrosia is brought to Olympus by doves coming through clashing rocks, and one loses its tail feather as it comes through. It closes on his tail feather. It doesn't make it all the way through. In the Odyssey, we have the timorous doves that bear ambrosia, Father Zeus. So here we got the ambrosia carried by the birds, the chief god or the thunder god. The cupbearers of the gods originally, the cupbearer was Hebe, the goddess of youth, which is what the ambrosia and nectar give the gods. However, it ended up being Ganymede, who was a young boy stolen by Zeus in the form of an eagle, and his father was then given horses to basically pay him off for his loss of his son. Zeus is a baby. Zeus's father was eating all his kids, so Zeus was stolen away and raised in secret. And he was fed milk there from the goat, Amalthea, ambrosia brought by doves, and nectar brought by an eagle. Or another version, one horn of the Amalthea gives nectar and one gives ambrosia. He's also sometimes fed honeycomb from nymphs, who are the daughters of Melisaeus, which means honeybee. In fact, and one of them named, I believe, Adrastus, which later on became one of the names of one of the fates. In Moira was quoted in Athenaeus. She writes that Zeus in his cave was fed on ambrosia brought by doves from Oceanus, and on nectar brought by the eagle from out of the rock. This is actually a very important myth that a lot of people have never even heard of before. I was very surprised when I ran across it myself. I think I actually ran across it when I was researching the origins of Wicca, because Amalthea gets mentioned in Wiccan, in the Wiccan Book of Shadows. So Homer being one of the oldest sources in the Iliad. In the heat of combat, Hector addresses his horses, which Andromache, his wife, a woman obviously, had fed. Even before she fed her husband, when the horses came there. She set before you honey-hearted wheat mixing in wine to drink, which, as Calvert Watkins point out, is not the sort of thing you feed horses. So it's clearly something really special is going on. There's a wonderful story of Nestor's cup, also in the Iliad, where Nestor and Melchion go to Nestor's tent, and in the middle of battle, Melchion's been wounded. They go into the tent, and for them, Beatrice Hecamede prepared a mixed potion. She first set out before the two a table, fair, well polished, with legs of blue enamel, and thereon a bronze basket, and therewith an onion, a garnish for their drink, and yellow honey, and ground meal of holy barley in a beautiful vessel. In it the woman, like to the goddesses, mixed them a potion with Pramnean wine, and on it she grated goat's cheese with a bronze grater, and on it she sprinkled white barley, and she bade them drink when she had made ready the mixed potion. And they drink the drink, and they forget all their cares, even though Melchion's wounded, and they sit there and they talk, and we hear all about what's going on. And this mentions Pramnean wine. This is only mentioned in Homer, and anywhere actually, in this passage and one other passage. And the other passage is in the Odyssey. And this passage in the Odyssey is when Circe tells Odysseus how to call up the dead. And what he's supposed to do. Hear then, great soldiers, setting foot, obey me. Dig a well shaft of 4 arms square. Pour out libations round it to the unnumbered dead. Sweet milk and honey, then sweet wine, Pramnean wine. And last, clear water, scattering handfuls of white barley. Pray now with all your heart to the faint dead. Swear you will sacrifice your finest heifer at home in Ithaca, and burn for them her tenderest parts in sacrifice. And vow to the Lord Tiresias, apart from all, a black lamb, handsomest of all your flock, thus to appease the nations of the dead. Then slash a black ewe's throat and a black ram facing the gloom of Erebus, but turn your head away towards ocean. It's one of the most detailed descriptions of a ritual we find in ancient times. It's a wonderful ritual. So again, we have Odysseus is offering to the dead, and the idea of this is to bring them there so we can talk to them. So he's enlivening the dead with a mixture of milk, honey, some kind of wine, and barley. The apples of the Hesperides are one of the foods that we run across. This is very interesting to me because you read a lot of people pissing and moaning about how we have so little Indo-European stuff clearly in the Greek myths. Well, this one it's very difficult to be more Indo-European. We've got Heracles as one of his labors having to go to bring back the golden apples of the Hesperides. They grow in a tree far to the west, but it's also where Atlas is. So it's actually at the center of the earth, even though it's described as being in the west, on the edge of the sea. According to Euripides, there are ambrosial springs there. On his way there, he has to fight Kuknos. Kuknos means swan, so he has to fight a bird in order to get there. And he needs the help of the nymphs, who are the daughters of Zeus and Themis, Themis being the goddess of justice and order, to get help from Nereus. In other words, he needs help from women who are spirits of water to accomplish his task. And he's accomplishing his task by, actually, in some versions he kills the snake that guards the tree. Other versions of it, Atlas takes care of the snake for him. So you've got a tree with a snake by water with ambrosial springs guarded by women. It's just so bloody Indo-European. It just sounds so much like the Norse cosmology. So the idea that the ambrosial springs being from there. All right, let's be swallowed up by India. India, the land of sacred drinks. There are 4 that I'm going to be talking about here. These 4 overlap. Sometimes sometimes one is called by the name of the other. Sometimes we're not sure whether it actually is a separate drink. We don't know. The most famous of it is Soma. One of the 10 books of the Rig Veda is entirely hymns to Soma, and and Soma pops up through all the other books as well. It's a plant, a drink, and a god. It was a plant. It was pressed in water, and the juice was treated in various ways, which I will describe in a little bit, and then consumed. However, we do find something very interesting well, before I get to that, what the hell kind of plant was it? No one knows. People will tell you they do know. People do not know. You'll very commonly find it identified as a mushroom, for instance. I am very strongly convinced that that's not true. One of the reasons I'm not convinced is because the priests did not go out and gather this plant. The priests did not get it in a fresh form. They got it in a dried form from sudras, or outsiders. The priest and it was gathered from the mountains. The priests themselves did not know what this thing looked like when it was growing. They only knew what it looked like in dry form. So the priests did not know what this plant was, essentially. So all of our descriptions in the Rig Veda of this plant come from the priests. And most of the descriptions actually were referring to the juice from the plant, not of the plant itself. And another thing is that most of the descriptions of the plant are referred to its color, but first of all, it's referring to the color of the juice. Secondly, color terms are notoriously difficult to translate. The one word that Wasson, who's the primary proponent of the idea that it was a mushroom, he says it refers to scarlet, to the scarlet cap of the Amanita muscaria mushroom. That word actually means more like yellow or green. So that blows that part of the theory in the air. So even at the time of the Rig Veda, there apparently were substitutes being used, and the identity of the plant has long been lost. What even it did is open to question. It apparently had some sort of psychoactive abilities, but I don't think it was hallucinatory. I don't think it was intoxicating, because Indra drank this before he went into battle. And hallucinating and being drunk are not the best things to be when you're trying to keep from getting killed. More likely is it was some sort of stimulant. What that plant would be, I don't know. I don't think anybody will ever know, because the people who wrote the poems that we're getting our evidence from didn't know. So how are we going to figure out from what they didn't know? In the Chandogya Upanishad, however, it has this: Ara and Nya are 2 oceans in the world of Brahman, and the 3rd heaven from here. There is Amandiya Lake. This is the Soma bestowing fig tree. So we've got this wonderful heaven thing, a great lake with a fig tree from which drops Soma juice. Does that sound at all familiar? According to some other sources, like Katyayana Shrauta Sutra, priests aren't supposed to give the genuine Soma drink to the Kshatriya or Vaishya, those are the other social classes. Instead, they should be given fig juice, or more correctly, a mixture of fruit from the roots, juice of the roots of a banyan tree, and the juice of the fruits of the Ashvata, Palaksha, and Udumbara trees, and those are all 3 kinds of figs. Soma is also called the cosmic fig pillar, supported in the sky, and it's called Vanaspati, the evergreen. Vanaspati means Lord of the forest. In the rituals, the sacrificial post to which the animals were tied, the yupa, is referred to as Vanaspati as well. And the yupa is also identified with the cosmic pillar. So we've got this whole thing swirling around with Soma equals fig tree equals pillar of the universe equals Vanaspati equals the yupa equals the center of the universe. All these things floating around. So seeing figs as a food of the gods, but fig juice specifically being the sacred drink. Ashvata, by the way, means horse tree, and in Norse mythology, I had mentioned this one. The horse Sleipnir, the horse of Odin, is tied to the tree. So Yggdrasil is actually a horse tree as well. In fact, I believe Odin is described as riding the tree when he's tied to it. Yeah. So it is written as well. So it's a horse tree as well. One of the major myths of Soma is about its theft, where an eagle or falcon, the word is variously translated as Shena or Sopanya, which could be Indra, or more likely sent by Indra, flies to the mountain where Soma is hidden and steals it. And while flying back, the archer Kashanu shoots an arrow at him and nicks off one of his claws, and the claw falls to earth and a tree grows from it. In an interesting variant in the Maitreya Samhita, we read, when the meters fetched Soma from there, they did not find their way because of darkness. Then Gayatri, and Gayatri is one of the various meters that the poems of Rig Veda are written in. It's the most important one. It's also the name of a prayer that's said every morning that also made its way in the Book of Shadows. That is the most important prayer, and it's called that because it's in that meter. So then Gayatri flew with a she-goat upwards. She created light for them. Only after this they brought Soma. So that's just one little variation that sneaks in somewhere. And there's some fun details in that one, which you might be picking up on already, but we'll get to them. So in general, the myth of the ritual. It's a drink which gives immortality to gods and men. And it does everything. It gives a long life, cures diseases, produces ecstasy, stimulates poetry, brings valor and strength, gives victory. Basically, if you want it, you can get it from drinking Soma. One of the texts says the gods were not satisfied. They wished to conquer death once for all and offered a Soma libation, which had the results they wanted. Now notice here, the gods use Soma to conquer death. The gods are not inherently immortal. They need Soma, just like the Norse gods need the apples and Greek gods need their nectar. So interesting now, even though the proto-indo-european gods are immortal, they're not actually immortal, they're potentially immortal if they get the right stuff. Speaking of immortality, a lot of us have heard this. Rig Veda 8:43:3. We have drunk Soma, we have become immortal. We have gone to the light, we have found the gods. What can hostility now do to us? And what is the malice of mortal man, O immortal one? We've gone to the light, we have found the gods. So they apparently did something big. The ritual around it is the preparation, offering, and consumption of a drink made from the plant. The ritual is called the Agnishtoma. It takes 1 day, but it's preceded by 3 days. It's called the Upasit days. The Upasit days, on each day there's a Pravagya ritual in the morning and evening, and I'll be describing the Pravagya in great detail because it's a very important and very cool ritual. A hymn to the waters and to Upam Napat, we'll talk about, is recited when the waters fetched they'll be needing. In verse 4 it says, Upam Napat, give the sweetened waters with which Indra grew to heroic strength. The priests purchased the Soma plants from outsiders, people who aren't actually allowed to drink Soma, shouldn't really even have it. They're they are paid a bunch of things, and the final thing that they're paid is a she-goat. It's brought in a cart, Indra is invited, sacrificed. The space is built, the yupa is cut and then set up, the sacrificial pole. Holes are dug because they're going to take these holes and put boards over them and then press the soma on top of them, and it provides resonance. Makes it sound much louder. And hearts are made from the dirt they dig up. A goat is tied to the stake. It's dedicated to the Ashvins, the horse gods, who will be important a little bit, and Pushan was the god of the ways. If you went to my Indo-European one yesterday, Papasan is the origin of Pushan, and then they're sacrificed. The soma is now the embryo wrapped in a covering of cloth. It's given a guest offering, and then on the final Upasad day, a goat is sacrificed to Agni and Soma. Then a cow is milked, and the milk is going to be used later on. On the main day of the pressing, which is the day of the pressing, the first prayer in the morning is addressed to the Ashvin. It's a fairly long prayer. There are 3 pressings of it. They do it in the morning, they do it in the noon, they do it in the evening. The morning offerings are to Agni, Ushas, who's the dawn, and the Ashvins. Then they draw the water. It's pressed with they put it between 2 stones and smash it down. Although there's evidence that originally it was done in a mortar and pestle. It's then mixed with water, filtered in a filter made with bull's hair. It's done by the Advayu. The Advayu is the priest most closely connected to the Ashvins. It's mixed with milk and probably honey and offered to the Ashvins, and that's offered to Agni, Indra or Sarasvati. Cakes are offered. Soma is offered to Indra Vayu, Mitra Varuna, and the Ashvins. When Indra gets Soma mixed with milk, and the Ashvins get it mixed with honey. The Ashvins are very closely connected to honey. The priest drinks Soma. All this is done inside this hall, this roof hall. A lot of stuff is done outside. The actual preparation is done outside. The drinking is done inside the hall. Everybody seated where they're supposed to be. This priest has this spot to sit. This priest has this spot to sit. It's very carefully orchestrated, as all Vedic rituals are. For instance, he then gives directions. Let the Hotris cup advance. Let the Brahmins, the chanters, the sacrifices cup advance. The cupbearers, the fire priest, approach and fill up the cups with pure soma. So the Advayu priest actually choreographs it. Okay, you come on up, your turn. Okay, now you come up, it's your turn. He makes sure everybody comes up in the right order. Among the offerings, by the way, is the one to the ancestors, to the fathers. At the end of the whole ritual, everything's thrown into the water, and the sacrifice is white bathed, and then a barren cow is sacrificed to Mitra Varuna. So you can see it's a very complicated ritual. I've just given you a very rough summary of it. But the big things are that they buy the soma from these outsiders for a number of things, including a goat. They press it between the stones. They mix it with milk and honey, offered to gods. The priest drinks some. The person for whom the sacrifice is being offered drinks some, and that all takes place indoors. Those are really the most important things about it. This is obviously something one has to have notes for. I don't know all this stuff off the top of my head. The Pravarga ritual, I mentioned it's done twice a day. This is a cool ritual. Let me spell this one out for you because you can find it on YouTube. At least part of it. You can find the most impressive part of it on YouTube. It's definitely worth watching. The Pravarga ritual. This is massively cool. Let me give it literally means to be placed. So because it means to be placed on the fire. It probably was originally a separate ritual that got absorbed into the Soma ritual. It's sometimes actually at the end of the day, the end of the whole sacrifice, called the head of the sacrifice, which is why they sometimes put it at the very end. A stallion leads the collectors of clay to a hole where they collect the clay from. The priest calls the clay the head of Macha, and the stallion sniffs the clay. Then they make an hourglass-shaped pot. They actually make 3 of them. They make one main one and 2 spares, and you'll see in a moment why they make 2 spares. The offering, this is called the Mahavira. The offering itself is called the Garma. They fumigate when they're dry. They're fumigated with fire from horse dung, and then it's cooled down by pouring goat's milk over them. Pot is then covered with ghee and put in the fire and heated till it's red hot. And when it's red hot, a mixture of cow's milk and goat's milk is poured into it, and you get this pillar of flame 10 yards up into the air. And that's what you can see on YouTube. Now you can see why they have 2 spares. Because there's an excellent chance you're going to break this pot when you do that. What's left of it, it says the cow's milk is the milk of the Soma, who's one of the priests. The goat's milk is the milk of the gods. Some of what's left is drunk by the sacrificers, and the rest is offered to the Ushvins. The platters for the cakes, which are baked at the Bravaria, are horse-shaped. And our Rig Veda calls the Garma offering to the Ushvin Soma, and treats the 2 as if they have the same properties, even though it's just a mixture of goat's milk and cow's milk. It says it does all the wonderful things that Soma does. It's an awesome ritual. I would love to go to one in real life. Like I said, there's a video of parts of it on YouTube. Highly recommend it. Surā is a drink that you don't run across as often. It's almost always translated as wine or spirits. If you read anything on the Vedic religion, they mention wine. They're talking about surā, which is not a wine. It's actually a beer. I have no idea why they'd ever translate this word wine. It's a combination of several different kinds of rice and several different kinds of barley, parched rice, sprouted rice. That's a bunch of rice that hasn't been any processed at all. All these things mixed together, and then mix some milk, put in it, and put in a hole for 3 days. Or it says until it's done. There's another. It also says that as well. So it's supposed to be 3 days or until it's done. So it's a lightly fermented beer, is what it is. So if you ever see wine mentioned in anything Vedic, they're actually talking about beer. The Ushvins caused 100 jars of it to flow from a horse's hoof. It's grouped with wrath and dice as the reason for sins. It's often compared to Soma. Whenever it's compared to Soma, Soma is the best, is the better one, and surā is awful. But it does have positive uses. It's associated with love and fertility, so brides are sprinkled with it. If a king has lost his power, he's supposed to drink it. When a king is inaugurated, the Raja Suyarite, it's created and the king drinks it. It's actually meant to restore his power after the Raja Suyarite, because supposedly that makes him less powerful. I don't know why inaugurating a king makes him less powerful, but that's the Vedas for you. The ritual it's done for is called the Satramani rite, which is also performed for those who have drunk too much Soma and either vomited or gotten diarrhea from it. So apparently Soma could do both of those things. I don't think I've ever seen used as a clue for what the plant was, but I think it should be considered. So it's prepared 3 days before the main ritual, giving it time to ferment. On the 4th day, there are sacrifices. The Soma is purified in a sieve of horsehair. Remember, the Soma was in a bull's hair, and bulls are connected with Indra, who's the main god of the Soma ritual, and horsehair is connected with the Ushvins, who are the main god of the Satramani. A great colored he-goat is sacrificed to the Ushvins, a ram to Sarasvati, and a bull to Indra. They're also offered milk and surā. The ancestors are offered surā, and the sacrificer drinks what's left. In part of the ritual, it's said it's Soma, or it's said to be the Soma of the Kshatriyas, the warriors. And in one text, it's equated with Amrita, which we're going to talk about later. As part of the ritual, they use eagle feathers to purify the cups and or the sacrifice. And no other Vedic ritual uses eagle feathers, which is kind of odd when you figure the myth of the Soma involving the eagle stealing the Soma. You don't find the eagle in the Soma ritual, but you find it in the surā ritual. My theory is that the surā ritual is the surviving version of the sacred drink ritual that the Indo-Aryans had before they came into the area where they discovered the Soma plant. And then they started doing the Soma ritual instead. And the surā was still done, but it actually acquires some of the characteristics of the Soma ritual and becomes second class. But I believe it was historically the original one. Third drink to talk about is madhu, which of course comes from the same root as the word mead. And in fact, it does mean mead. It also means honey, and it also means sweet. That causes some big problems, because when the Rig Veda uses madhu, you're never sure which of those meanings it is meant. And sometimes you can it makes a big difference which one is meant. Probably it originally had its own identity. It might have been a synonym for surā, in fact. But by the time the Rig Veda comes around, it's been absorbed into other kinds of drinks. So you see Soma called madhu, and milk called madhu, for instance. Soma is called somyam madhu, which means honey, soma, sweet honey, or madhu, which is honey. Soma is called the madhu of Tvashter, one of the gods. Garma, from the Pravagya ritual, the hot milk, is also called madhu. It's connected with the Ashvins. The Ashvins pour out 100 pots of madhu. They're madhu drinkers. They even give madhu to the bees. So it's the Ashvins who give the bees their honey in Vedic ritual. By the way, again, for those who were the proto-European one, the Ashvins are the descendants of the dual Soma, the twin horse gods. Ashvin just means horse god. And the big myth around this one, I think it's a funny little myth, and it involves horses, so I'm in. It's the Ashvins wanted the secret of the madhu, and Dudyansh had the secret of the madhu. So they went to him and said, "Teach us the secret of the madhu." And he says, "I can't. Indra says if I teach it to anybody, he will cut my head off." And the Ashvins say, "No problem. We know the secret of removing and putting back on heads. So here's what we'll do. We will cut off your head. We will replace it with a horse's head. The horse's head can then tell us the secret of madhu, and then we'll take the horse's head off and put your head back on." So they did this, and after the horse's head had given them the secret of the madhu, Indra shows up and chops the horse's head off, and they just plop his Dudyansh's head back on, and now they know the secret of the madhu. And the horse's head ends up in the mountains in a lake, and at one point Indra uses it as a great weapon against the asuras. In fact, then in later Hinduism, it becomes the submarine mare, the mare that lives under the ocean. And when the end of the world comes, it will rise up and burn out the whole universe. So that we got the fire and water theme still existing there, mixed in with the horse theme. They also are the ones that know the secret of the head of the sacrifice, because when the gods conducted the first sacrifices, they beheaded the sacrifice and then didn't know what to do with the head, because the head was now gone, and so their sacrifice was incomplete. But the Ashvins knew the secret, so the gods went to the Ashvins and said, "Teach us the secret of the head of the sacrifice," which is the Mahavira, the pot that's in the Pravagya ritual. And the Ashvin says, "We will, except we want the Soma," because the Ashvins had been forbidden to use Soma, because the Ashvins are very close to people, and so they're always wandering around among men, and so they're very impure. And plus, they're also the physicians of the gods, so they deal with a lot of nasty things, so they're even more impure. So they weren't allowed to have the Soma, but they said, "We won't tell you the secret of the head of the sacrifice unless you let us have Soma." So the gods say, "Fine, you can have the Soma." So the Ashvins ended up getting the Soma because they knew the Pravagya ritual, essentially. But let's turn to a god. Let's take a break from drinks and turn to a god. Upam Napat. It means the Napat of the waters. And you may remember that Napat is an untranslatable word. That means the nearest male relative to the nearest female relative. So your daughter's son or your sister's son are your Napat. So it means close relative of the waters, or possibly descendant of the waters. He shines without fuel in the waters. It's always described. He's offered to when water is drawn for the Soma ritual, the Soma ritual. There are 3 or sometimes an indeterminate number of young women who give him food and surround him when he's in the waters. They are called the waters themselves, the Apa. He's their Napat. The Apa are equated with ghee, milk, honey, and Soma. Their wave, rich and sunny, is drunk by Indra, exhilarating him and giving him heroic strength, which is the same thing, of course, that Soma does. This might just refer to the water used in preparing the Soma, and be just sort of extended, adding the powers of Soma to the water itself. In fact, they say Soma is the drop which grows in the waters, which makes Soma the embryo of the waters, just like Upam is. Upam is also equated with Agni a lot, so he's equated with fire. So Upam can be seen as both water and fire. And Soma is dwelling in the waters, is shining in the waters. So he's like the fire water god. It comes down to. All right, one last drink, Amrita. Amrita seems to be more of a mythical drink than a physical drink. Sometimes Soma is called Amrita, but there's no separate drink called it. But it literally means the undying. It's cognate with ambrosia. We've already run across. The myth of its creation is somewhat late. It's found in the Mahabharata, so we're talking 1000 AD. But it definitely echoes an earlier one. In this one, the gods wanted the Amrita, and they didn't quite know what to do. And the Asura said, well, we know what to do. Let's take the world mountain, and then take the world snake, and we'll wrap the world snake around the mountain, and we'll pull it back and forth, and it'll churn the ocean, and then we'll get the Amrita from it. So they do that. And the friction lights all the trees on the mountain in fire, and the fire just rolls down from it into the mountains, into the waters, and they just keep churning. And eventually, from the churning, the water becomes ghee. So now they're churning the ghee, and they end up churning out about Soma, the sun, the goddess of surā, the white horse of the sun, a great gem, the elephant of Indra, poison, which Shiva swallows, which is why he has a blue throat. Shiva. Yeah, the magic wish-giving cow, and Dupantari, who is a physician of the gods, which we can remember the Ashvins were also physicians of the gods, and he has a pot of the Amrita. So now we've got the Amrita. So now the Asura, the bad guys, say, we want our share. And the gods say, sure, you can have your share. Just sit down. And all the Asuras sit down nicely in order. And Krishna changes himself into a beautiful woman and goes over and distracts them. And while he's distracting them, the other gods drink the Soma, drink the Amrita. And while they're doing that, the Asura Rahu sees what's going on, so he tries to get some of the Amrita, but Vishnu cuts his head off. Another story about the Amrita is in Kataka Samhita. The Asura Shushna has the Amrita, which is bad because the gods and the Asuras are having a big battle. And every time an Asura dies, they give him the Amrita and he comes back to life. So it's difficult to defeat an enemy like that. So the gods want the Amrita and they want to steal it from the Asuras. So Indra changes himself into a drop of honey, drops on the path of Shushna. And Shushna sees the honey and eats it. And so once he's inside, Indra turns himself into a falcon, steals the Amrita, and bursts out and flies away with the Amrita. I'm sure we can see some similarities between that and the other myths. Amrita gives the gods immortality. It doesn't give people immortality, but allows them to live their full lifespan. Like you don't die of an accident or illness. In the Rig Veda, there are also prayers that may I live to be 100 years. There wasn't they didn't want to be immortal. They just wanted to live a good long life. So I told you I was going to go west to east and skip over one and get back to it. The one to get back to is Iran. I want to take care of these other Indian ones first. And then this is our last trip. In Iran, the fire and water theme appears in the thing called Kharana. And just let me write that down for you guys in case you ever want to look it up or do it. Plus, I want to annoy him over there. But let him look for his characters. Here we are. Kharana. That's a schwa, that whole thing. Kharana. It comes from the word swell, meaning sun. It's the traditional interpretation of it was glory. I don't think it's now generally just thought of as good things in life. I think glory is actually a better translation of it. It can appear in the form of a ragna, which is a bird of prey, probably a falcon, or it could even be a raven. In the Yasht, Kharana leaves Yima being the god of the dead, for the first time in the shape of the bird Varagna, and is seized by Mitra, and then it leaves 3 times in a row, and it's seized by Mitra. It's given to Upam Napa, which is almost exactly the same name as the Indian version of him, who dwells in the waters and is frequently said to have swift horses. Now, there's a battle going on between Spenta Manyu, who's the spirit of Ahura Mazda, the good god, and Angra Manyu, who's the bad god, and hides it in the bottom of the sea Varukasha. Now, yesterday I talked about the sea Varukasha. There's a great tree with a tree of seeds, and at the bottom of this Varukasha, it's the Indo-European tree, water sort of thing. It's hidden down there. And Ahura Mazda says that anyone who gets the Kvarna gets the gifts of priesthood, power over cattle and pasture, and the defensive force with which all enemies will be vanquished. And all you Dumazillians will recognize the three functions right there. Frangasya, who is not an Aryan, should not be king, decides he wants to be king. So he dives into the water to try to get it, and it runs away from him and splashes water out to form rivers. And this happens 3 times, and finally Frangasyan gives up. So Frangasyan, who is not properly qualified to get this fire in the water, goes after it, and the water overflows as a result. The actual drink is called haoma, and the modern word for it is homa. It's cognate with the word Soma. They both come from the proto-indo-european Soma, which just means the thing that's pressed. It's pre-Zoroaster, so it's Iranian paganism, and it's a plant, a drink, and a god. In modern ritual, they use ephedra for the plant. It vivifies the dead, gives immortality, cures the impure. We've heard it all before. The home ritual is most often celebrated in honor of a dead person to enliven their spirit in the other world. Preparation and consumption of home brings the Numina, the various spirits and gods, near to you, and it gives them power. It empowers priests, fights the lie. It created the world. It grows on a mountain, and it's carried from there to other mountains by auspicious birds. So just like Soma grew in the mountain and is carried around by birds, so is Homa. It's performed and prepared and consumed in the Yasna ritual, and you definitely want to know how to do this one, because there is another YouTube video of a whole entire Yasna ritual. It's actually one that was put on to be filmed. It's so you don't see the whole thing, but that's because a very large percentage of it is a recitation of Zoroastrian scriptures in Avestan, which is a language that even the priests don't know the meaning of, but they've got this thing memorized, sound for sound, for like an hour and a half. They can chant this thing straight. It's quite a tour de force. But they've left those parts out, so you just see the things that get done. But it's very highly recommended. I mean, if you're interested in sacred drinks, it's really important. But I would recommend anybody who performs or writes ritual to watch this particular thing, the Yasna ritual. You just go to YouTube, type in Yasna Zoroastrian, and you'll find it. The reason I think everybody should see it is to see the grace, the beauty, the complexity, just how well these people perform this ritual. How there's not a wasted action. It's just gorgeous, and we should all be that good ritualists. I'm not even close to it myself, but I definitely aspire to that kind of a beauty. So that's the big old honkin' ritual. This is it's divided into 2 halves. The Paragna ritual, which is not related to the word Pravarga, which when I was preparing this thing, believe me, it took forever for me to keep those 2 straight. And that's where they prepare the first section of the Parahom. What they do is in a Zoroastrian temple, there should be a courtyard. In the courtyard, there should be a pomegranate tree, a date palm tree, a well, and a goat. And they go out there. They strip off a leaf of the date palm tree. They use that to make a cord, which is tied around something. We don't really have to talk about that. They take a twig from the pomegranate tree. They draw water from the well. They get milk from the goat. And actually, there's one guy doing it, the Rushby. He's the assistant priest. So the Rushby brings these things back inside to the temple, and he performs the ritual, the Parahom, which is he has a mortar. There are all sorts of rituals. I'm not going to mention. You'll see them if you watch the video. But the big part of it is in a mortar he puts the phedra, the pomegranate tree, and some water, and smashes it all up, and then filters it. The pomegranate leaves are said to represent the vegetable kingdom, and the milk or the animal kingdom. The milk is not used at this point, however. What is created is called the parahome. So when all this is done, the second priest, the Zot, is the main priest, comes in. He gets to be the main priest because he's the one that's going to be chanting for an hour and a half. And it's quite a job to learn how to chant this thing for an hour and a half. So he definitely has earned a spot. Many hymns are recited. There's an offering to the waters and an offering to fire. There's a consecration and consumption of what's called the drum, which is a flatbread, and ghee. These are equivalent to sacrifice. They represent the animal kingdom, the vegetable kingdom. And originally, there was an actual sacrifice in old days as part of the ritual, and parts of the fat were given to the water. And I assume the meat is then eaten. The parahome is then offered to the fire. It's actually like held up in this little. It's in this little flat dish and presented to the fire. And then the Zot drinks it. Now the Zot makes parahome again, but this time he adds the goat's milk to it. And now it's home. That's the final thing. And he presents the home to the fire. There are lots and lots of more hymns. And then some of the home is taken outside and poured into the well that the water came out of. It strengthens the water and thereby all creation. The rest is given to whoever sponsored the ritual. And they also leave extra in there in case something happens on the way out to the well, like if something impure goes by or they trip or whatever. That's just a safety thing. The people who have it made for them either drink it themselves or pour it out at the base of fruit trees. It's also supposed to be used for people who are sick. It should be the last drink you drink before you die. It should be the first thing you have when you're born. So we have this delightful ritual in which you take the world tree and mix it in with the waters from the well, and they form that into a sacred drink, and then mix it with the product of the world, and then put it back into the well. It's just a wonderful Indo-European ritual. I think it could be adapted very nicely into an ADF ritual form. I have heard, however, that a phedra in cold water does not actually have any effects. And you have to actually put it in hot water. So it doesn't actually do anything physiologically when they prepare this. So the Yuzna ritual believed to enliven the world and helps in the battle between Ahura Mazda and Anu Manyu. All of creation is a battle constantly going on between the forces of good and evil, the forces of the truth and the lie. In the end, the good guys are going to win, but it's touch and go along the way, and it's our job to help, to join in on the good side. It's only supposed to be drunk by the deserving. He belongs to the righteous, not the wicked. That's what it says. So, after having made this wonderful tour of the Indo-European world, let me give some summaries here. First of all, a tangent. What's up with the goats? The goat is found in Norse cosmology. I forgot to mention the gallows horns. These two wonderful horns that were gold and ended up getting melted down, stolen and melted down. But what was on it was actually preserved. And on one of them is a three-headed guy holding an axe with a goat on a leash. And the other one is a woman with a horn, like a Valkyrie thing. Three-headed, and three snakes with a three-headed guy too. So that's your basic Indo-European snake-killing myth, and the goat being connected with the thunder god there. So we find the goat in Norse cosmology with Hethron. We find it on the Galahus horn. There's the Greek story of Alethea. We find in the Kataka Samhita where it gets taken to heaven by the eagle. We find it in the Pravagya ritual when they pour the goat's milk and the cow's milk into the red-hot pot, and we find it in the Iranian yasna, and that's the milk being poured in. Also among the Kalasha, who are an Indo-Iranian people who are neither Indic nor Iranian, so discussed. They make a connection between bees and goats. Both are foraging and pastures in order to provide sacred wealth for mankind. So they make a connection between goat's milk and honey themselves. So what's up with that? the Indo-Europeans were obsessed with cows. They're not into goats. Well, there are two possibilities for this. One is, according to Macrobius, it seems to be the goats' habit at pasture always to seek the heights while grazing. So goats were seen as the animals that went up high in the mountains. And I think more significantly, goats eat leaves of trees and cows don't. So the goat eats the leaves of the world tree, but cows don't. For instance, the goat in Zoroastrian courtyard presumably ate some of those pomegranate leaves. So the goat's milk is the essence of the world tree. It's the creation. It's cosmos made into liquid form. So that's why goats instead of cows. And by the way, I conducted a sacred drink ritual a few years back up at a gathering in Canada, and discovered that if you take barley, fry it in butter, soak it in mead overnight, strain it, and mix it with goat's milk, it actually tastes really good. Mm-hmm. I had never done it before, and I figured, why not? I could be in this big honking ritual, and it could all curdle on me and taste like crap, but I'll take the risk. And it actually tasted pretty darn good. So the mess we ended up with is a well with fiery water guarded by a male figure. In proto-indo-european terms, this would be haoma. It's accompanied by a number of cupbearers, likely 3 and likely female. Due to some impropriety, it overflows and forms the rivers of the world, or at least some of them. The myths around the drink per se is that the nectar, which would be it's the word proto-indo-european that's been suggested for the drink. It just means the overcomer of death. The nectar originally belonged to the outsiders, but the gods stole it. An eagle or a falcon, which may be a god in bird form, is involved in the theft. Something, either part of the bird or part of the drink, is lost on the way. It is associated with a male deity, but is distributed or guarded by female figures, often more than one. The drink may be partially replaced by food, which nonetheless has characteristics otherwise associated with the drink. I think of the foods that I've mentioned, apples, nuts, and figs are all tree foods. So mythically, they grow on the world tree. Containers such as cauldrons may also acquire these sort of characters as well, so you get the various cauldrons of inspiration, stuff like that. So, an overall ritual, an alcoholic drink, which might have been called medu or nectar, is prepared from honey and or barley. You see honey and barley continuously making their way in there. If one of these isn't used in the preparation, it's added before the drink is consumed. The fermentation was probably part of the ritual, or if there wasn't time for the drink to ferment, a previously fermented alcohol drink could be used. Mixed with a dairy product, most likely goat's milk. It's served inside to men who are seated and arranged by status. The serving is done by a woman. It was offered to the gods and most likely the ancestors, as well as being drunk by those present. You could make a nice little ritual around that, and actually, if you go to my website, you'll see one that I wrote on that for nectar, which was performed and worked out fairly well. I can see aspects of this being adopted into ADF Waters of Life rituals as well. Particularly interested in the idea of what it's made out of. In our grove, we use honey water for our Waters of Life, and that sort of plays off of this. We don't go whole hog and go with barley and goat's milk. But although in some of our rituals we do mix it with milk. Our Breeds Day we mix the milk in. Our American Independence Day we mix milk and honey, land flowing with milk and honey. Our Hussos ritual, our equinox ritual, a little milk ends up in it. But we've adopted this to a certain extent. But as you can see, it's quite a topic. Their entire books have been written just on Soma. So, and I have a book written just on surā, another book written on just one of the aspects of Pravarga ritual. So they're all big topics, and I've only given you a nice little overview today of the notes that I have, and the notes that I don't have are even more extensive. So I hope that this has been of some interest in helping your personal life.